Cops have read it. What's the most bullshit-sounding excuse you got that actually turned out to be true? Got a call of a domestic dispute that sounded very heated, and a lot of banging was heard. Get to scene, and I can hear someone yelling and swearing and brawling. Doesn't sound good at all. Guy answers the door, shirt off and angry, but seems bewildered as to why police had been called. He told me he was building IKEA furniture. Sounds like the most bullshit thing. But we enter, see the new IKEA furniture half set up, and no one else is home. Color me surprised. Edit, thanks for the silver and gold. To answer a few people. No, I did not help assemble the furniture. No one should assemble IKEA stuff while armed. Story 2, during a search of a person, I pulled out a bag of a sticky dark substance consistent with heroin. The subject had multiple drug priors and is a known heavy heroin user. He immediately tells me it is burnt sugar, and he is pissed someone sold it to him. Long story short, when I tested the substance, it did not test positive for heroin. Story 3, I'm running booking one night. Guy gets brought in for possessing a truly stupendous amount of drugs. I'm talking like 2 Rubbermaid totes full of shrooms, a huge bag of weed, and enough heroin to overdose half the county. Well, says he, I'm a D informant, and they told me to make the drop so they could be there and raid the crap out of everybody and let me go for helping. Read. Face left, please. Guy's like, I'm telling you, dude, they're gonna be super pissed that you country retards f***ed up your bust. Whatever, get in the holding cell and shut up. About 3 hours later, 3 guys show up, DIA agents. They're super pissed that our deputies f***ed up their bust. I go back to the holding cell to let the guy out, and he's just like, they're super pissed, huh? Yeah, told you so. Story 4. Former marechaussee here. Look it up, it is a Dutch thing. Police, but also military. We also had jurisdiction over the American soldiers stationed here. One day we got called over to a possible case of domestic violence. We arrive at the house, and the guy opened wearing only underwear. He told us he and his wife were role-playing. Of course, we didn't trust this and asked to see his wife. After denying us entry, we told we would come back with a warrant. He reluctantly agreed to let us enter. So we go in, and he opened the basement door, and inside was the freakiest sex dungeon. I mean, chains whips things. I couldn't identify hanging on the wall, and in the middle, hanging in chains, was his butt-naked, gagged wife. We asked her, but she told everything was okay. Turned out they were really into some kinky stuff. Asked them to keep the screaming part in the basement and to a minimal. We did the whole thing with a straight face, but as soon as we were in the car, story 5. No cops are posting in here anyway, so I'll throw my hat into the ring as a defense attorney. Guy pulled over for impaired driving and charged later with OE. My boss gets the criminal complaint, and the guy shows up for his initial appearance and tells her he hadn't been drinking despite horrifically failing the sobriety test. She's literally sitting next to him, and he's obviously wasted again. Disappointing, but not uncommon for alcoholics. The deputies arrest him for bail jumping because he drove himself to court that day, and while out on bail, he's not supposed to drink. He adamantly denies drinking. Blood tests come back. He didn't drink. Dude's diabetic without knowing it, and naturally got himself drunk. Because sometimes, when it goes untreated, diabetes can cause symptoms that look just like intoxication. Got him some insulin, and the charges dismissed. Edit, since there are so many people with the same questions. 1. As far as I'm aware, the guy did the field sobriety test and failed. The last part of the test is the breathalyzer, which he refused. Refusal is an automatic failure in and of itself, without failing the nystagmus, follow the finger, walk, leg lift, and count. 2. He didn't know he had diabetes. I already stated it in the original comment, but yeah, dude developed diabetes at some point and wasn't aware he had it until the case. 3, OE in Wisconsin is what DUI is in other parts of the US. Your first OE is not a criminal offense. It's just a ticket in Wisconsin, so it would have been at least this guy's second drunk driving accusation. But seeing as diabetes wasn't raised as a defense the first time, my assumption is he probably developed it after. Story 6. I was driving with my fiance, and we went through a roadblock where they checked registration and shit. We get to the cops, and they ask for our registration. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, so I open up the glove box, and right there is a clear, unmarked baggie filled to the brim with catnip. I completely forgot it was there and just froze. Wide-eyed, I turned to look at the cop shining his light through my open window, and he's frozen too, just staring at the baggie with this look on his face like, really? I just started immediately professing, OMG, I swear to God this is catnip. You can take it and smell it or test it or whatever, like I swear. And at this point, it's just so ridiculous that I start cracking up, and the cop takes it and reasonably deduces I'm telling the truth. And he starts laughing and calls his partner over and tells her what happened, and they both just cackled away for a minute and sent us on our way. Story 7. I got pulled over for driving to school at 10 a.m. The cop wanted to know why I was skipping school. I explained that our little town's girls basketball team just won state, and since the game was so far away, they let us start that day at 10:30 a.m. He followed me all the way to the school so he could ask the principal. I still don't know what was illegal about driving to school at 10 a.m., but he was kind of a douche. Story 8. Okay, so I'm going to tell my crazy story as the person on behind the wheel. My uncle was divorcing his terrible wife. He was no saint, but definitely on the right side of their divorce. The wife was still on the paperwork to take their 2 kids out of the school, even though my uncle had temporary custody while the courts did their thing. She had previously threatened to take them both and just run away, so I don't know why she was still on the paperwork. On picture day that year, she showed up to the school and signed both kids out and disappeared. I was not involved in the crazy process of calling the police and tracking the kids down, but I was pulled from school that day because I had my driver's license and could be an extra pair of hands. They managed to find the kids, and they were turned over my grandmother and mom, but my niece was distraught that she would be missing picture day. It was her first time away from her terrible mother, and she was finally allowed to be a cheerleader, a dream in her tiny eyes. So, me having my car and nothing else better to do, offered to take her back to the school. My mom got the school to agree to keep the person there a little longer, but it was going to be by the skin of our teeth that we would make it, as this was rural. Okay, we got in the car and I blasted down those dirt roads doing approx. 70 and a 35. Not a good decision on my part, but I was an anxiety-ridden 17-year-old dealing with a nasty divorce and kidnapping for the first time in my life. We, of course, get pulled over. I'm freaking out because I can't afford that bad a ticket and all the crap that was coming in that day. The cop listened to the story and ignored my barely held in tears and said he would let us off with a warning because he believed the story. And the only reason he believed the story was that he had just pulled over my uncle going the same speed the opposite direction on the same road and go the same story. Edit, my cousin, not my niece. She has that sound in her name and I always get it wrong. And I have not idea if my uncle got a ticket as I was too self-absorbed at 17 to consider asking him. Story 9. Not a cop, but heard it said to one. EMS. Go to a woman who has been attacked by her cat. Her injuries were crazy. Covered aim, blood, her scalp is literally shredded, huge lacerations, etc. I know cats are known to do some damage, but the story wasn't fitting and she was so sketchy about anyone going in her house. Adamantly refuses to let anyone inside because she thinks they're going to take away her cat. He didn't mean to, he was just excited by the birds. Her cat was a lynx. Story 10. I was the one with the excuse. Forgot my keys at friend's place before going out drinking that night. Get home at 2 a.m., no keys. Only one of our windows didn't have ghetto bars. So I took the screen out and starting pushing, sawing, smacking it up. Locks were on the sides, only providing friction. As I'm halfway in, I just feel whump, got tackled into the house. The officer was still outside, holding onto my ankles. I look up and just said, I'm astonished by your response time. I actually live here. Let me get up, unlock the door, and give you my ID. So I did, and he stares at it for a second, then says sorry, and sprints off to look for the person they were actually in the area looking for. Story 11. My dad is an officer, and he pulled someone over for speeding and running a red light, and they said their breast implant burst. He called EMS to rush them to the hospital, and turned out it did, and it's actually very dangerous if they leak. Edit. Thanks for my first silver edit. It's not actually as dangerous as I thought, thanks to the plastic surgeons that commented. Story 12. Not a cop. Family friend was. Pulled a guy over who was speeding profusely. Guy was obviously disheveled. He said he was headed to the hospital because he had a tick on his penis. Cop was confused, but he escorted him there, then waited in the lobby to check on him, see if he was blowing smoke. After a while, he asked the desk what was going on, why it took so long to take a tick off his penis. Her reply, it wasn't on it, it was in it. Story 13. My dad was a cop, and my favorite story of his goes like this. He's a young cop in a rough neighborhood. It's so late that the stoplights are flashing red, meaning treat it like a stop sign. Out of nowhere, this pink caddy goes rolling through the intersection. My dad pulls him over. A big black dude was driving. The caddy had fur interior, dice in the mirror. A real pimp car, if you know what I mean. My dad goes, "Sir, do you know you ran that light back there?" And this guy says, "Officer, I do believe I got between the flashes." My dad was laughing so hard, he had to let the guy go. Story 14. Not a cop, but I had a run-in with one that was really funny once. When I was 18, I was on a double date with a friend, and we stepped out of a restaurant to smoke. A cop came up and started harassing us, telling us there had been break-ins into cars in the area. Eventually, he said he needed to pat us down, and he pulled a brown paper bag out of my friend's pocket. He got a smug look on his face and asked, "So what's in here, huh?" My friend said, The Emancipation Proclamation with a completely straight face. The cop opened the bag, pulled out a small booklet, got embarrassed, and let us go. My friend had been to the Lincoln Museum earlier that day and did actually have a small copy of the Emancipation Proclamation in his pocket. Story 15. Former cop here. I was behind a vehicle that couldn't stay in the lane, kept swerving, etc. It was 1 a.m. and I think another drunk idiot on the road. Pull him over. Guy's a straight-up asshole to me, cursed me out, yelling at me, and I notice his speech is slurred. I get him out to car, and I can smell a fruity smell on his breath, and he has to lean against the car for support. I ask him how much he had to drink, and he tells me to f off. By this point, I'm ready to bring him in for a DUI, but I just had a feeling something wasn't right. I called EMS to come check him. Blood sugar was at 40. Not drunk, just a diabetic. If I would have arrested him, he probably would have died before I finished the paperwork. Go with your gut if something doesn't seem right. Story 16. Not a cop, but I have a pretty good one. In high school, some of my buddies sold weed, driving around in a car with a scale, baggies, and 2 to 4 O's at any given time. One day, T&E decided to go to a really good taco stand for lunch. In between deliveries, E is driving. They're making their way downtown when he starts laughing. E, did you see that? No. What? E, I'll turn around. You gotta see this. Dude, don't get us pulled over. Chill. He makes a U-turn and turns down a street. Nothing there, so he stops in front of a random house to look around. YTF was it? Just drive. I just saw a dude pushing a stroller with 2 whiner dogs in it. You're retarded. As soon as he started driving again, a cop car pulls up behind them and lights them up. Cop 1. What are you guys doing? E, panicking a bit. I saw a guy pushing a stroller with whiner dogs in it and had to show my freight. Cop 2. How come you're parked in front of this known trap house and your car smells like dope? Silence. E, this guy with a stroller and cops. Get out of the car. Car gets searched. They find all the shit. As they're getting loaded into the back of the cop car, all handcuffed up, Cop 2 just stops. Cop 2. Hey, Cop 1. Look at that. Cop 1. No shit. Everyone looks up at this old guy pushing a stroller with his 2 whiner dogs poking their heads out. Cops burst out laughing. They both got charged with possession trafficking. Good times. Edit. Wow. I've never had a comment blow up like this. Since everyone loves stories about E so much, here's another one for you. A while before the infamous whiner dog incident, he had to get new tires for his car. Brought it into a local tire shop and left it there for the day. Being the brilliant kid that he was, he left his stash in his favorite hiding spot, thinking nobody would ever find it. The hiding spot was in his spare tire compartment under the carpet in the hatchback trunk area. The guy changing his tires over was courteous enough to make sure his spare had the manufacturer recommended amount of air pressure in it. He helped himself to an Oz of high-quality bud while he was in there. E was pissed. He told us about it while we were blazing that night. We all laughed, thought it was great. He didn't. He strutted into that tire shop the next day and demanded to speak with the manager. Told him that his employee stole something from the back of his car and he wanted it back. When he refused to tell the manager what was stolen, the manager basically told him he couldn't do anything if he didn't know what it was and suggested he call the cops if he wants to escalate things. He didn't call the cops. Story 17. I had a run-in with the cops a few years ago, and I wonder exactly what they thought when they first stopped me. I had taken a cab back from a work party, and I was pretty drunk. My friend and I had just moved to this new apartment, so I accidentally gave the cab driver the wrong address. I ended up on a block that looked very similar to mine, and a building that looked like mine. There were 2 doors before getting to my apartment door, which was on the first floor. Like my apartment building, they left the first door unlocked and locked the second door. I kept trying my keys to open it, but I couldn't, and was confused. I went outside to look for my car and it wasn't parked there. That's when I realized I was on the wrong block. I started walking in the direction I thought my apartment was, when a cop car pulls up. They ask me what I'm doing and I tell them, I'm really drunk and I just want to go home, which was the honest truth. They told me they got a call about someone trying to get into an apartment building. I guess the people in that apartment building woke up and thought I was trying to break in. They were super suspicious of me at first, but eventually it became clear I was just some drunk idiot and not a burglar. They ran me through to make sure I didn't have warrants or anything, and when I checked out, they offered me a ride home. The ride back was hilarious because when we were getting to my apartment, I tried telling them that it was a bit complicated to get to because of all the one-way streets. The officer driving was like, "Who do you think you're with?" and then turned on the lights and went the wrong way down the street to get me home faster. It honestly felt like I was with the 2 cops from Superbad. Story 18. This was my favorite story from my 4th grade teacher, not a cop. She went to a cousin's wedding in mid-July. The cousin had overestimated how much champagne they would need at the reception and was giving away bottles to anyone who was interested. So my teacher took 3 and put them in the back seat of her car. Again, this was a hot summer day in July. After saying their goodbyes, My teacher, her husband, and her parents piled into the car and pulled out onto the highway, where two bottles burst open, spraying champagne everywhere and causing quite a ruckus. Of course, while this was happening, the car was swerving, as the driver was also getting bathed in sparkling champagne. So it came as no surprise that as soon as they collected themselves, they saw the familiar flashing lights of a state trooper and pulled over. According to my teacher, the first thing the cop said was, "I'm not going to ask if you've been drinking because I can smell it from here." My teacher tried explaining what had happened, but the cop wouldn't hear of it and ordered everyone out of the car. That's when the cop saw that everyone, both drivers and passengers, were dressed in their finery but soaked with champagne and looking quite shaken. A cursory search showed the open bottles, but the cop still insisted on a quick sobriety check just to make sure. Story 19. My first ever real call was for a flasher at the local park. When I got there and finally found him, it was a mentally impaired young man, 16, 17, who had a pair of headphones on and a full Pooh Bear. I said, "Hey man, come here. What the hell's going on? You know, you have to keep your pants on, especially at the park." He goes on to tell me he had bad itching down his pants and couldn't take it anymore, so he had to rip his pants off and was running home to get help. I said, "Come on, you couldn't make it home first?" He said, "No, I had ants in my pants." As sure as shit. According to more than one witness's account, he had been sitting in a sandbox playing at the park and accidentally on a nest of red ants that had crawled up his pant legs. Story 20. Not a cop, but I once got pulled over by a fire truck. It was Orlando in August 1990. It was close to 100 outside. I worked for a computer rental company. We would rent computers to companies in town for trade shows or for a lot of other situations. The company van was a ragged-out Chrysler minivan with 180K miles on it. The AC didn't work, so the windows were down. I was coming back to the office in heavy rush hour traffic, and I found myself in a right-turn-only lane and couldn't get out in time. So I was forced to make the right turn. I hit the gas to speed up and get in front of people making a left turn into my same direction. I had to get all the way over to the left side to make a U-turn, so I cut off a fire truck to do it, and one of the big squarish fire trucks with the flat front. I cut them off and got in the left turn lane to wait for the green arrow. I looked out the window to my left and saw a Dixie chopper lawnmower mowing the grass on the side of the road, maybe 15 miffed from me. It was already hot, but this tremendous wave of heat came in through the driver's side window. I thought, man, that's a hot lawnmower. The light turned green, and I started my U-turn. Halfway through it, this cloud of, I thought, steam came out of the hood and covered the windshield so I couldn't see. The power steering also failed. So I fought the car, trying to get back to the gas station at the corner so I could find a payphone. Yes, that's how old I am. But because I couldn't see, I missed the turn and ended up turning into an apartment complex. About this time, the clouds stopped and I could see again. Still no power steering. So I fought the car to do a U-turn so I could get back to the gas station. At this point, the fire truck I had cut off turned into the apartment complex, full lights, and blocked me in. Two huge firefighters got out of the truck, holding fire extinguishers like beer cans. "Excuse me, sir, did you know your van was on fire?" Turns out while I was cutting them off, I had been shooting flames out from under the passenger side of the van. They hit the lights, did a U-turn, and came back to me. The wave of heat wasn't from the lawnmower. They checked out the van and let me go. The cause turned out to be a damaged power steering line. It sprayed power steering fluid all over the exhaust manifold and caught fire. Tal-dat-dar. Cut off a fire truck while on fire. Got pulled over by the fire truck. Edit, added TLDR. Thanks for the silver. Story 21. Not a cop, but I did get stopped by one for eating a taco. I worked at a community college in LA that had a high school right next to it. Well, there was a lot of drugs sold through the fence at the high school, so there was always a cops driving up and down the street between the schools. Couldn't get a parking pass since I just worked at the school, so I always parked on that street. Hit up Taco Bell for lunch and was sitting in my car, eating my double-decker tacos, when a cop drove past. Next thing I know, he's flipping a U-turn and heading right for me. He slides to a stop driver window to driver window and yells at, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Stunned, I just said, "Eating my lunch." Well, he isn't buying it and says I'm hiding something. I just hold up my taco and look so confused. He burst out laughing and peeled out. Saw him a few times after that, and he always waved and had the biggest grin on his face. Story 22. Popped a college kid for shitty driving and pulled 100 grams of weed off of him. Also, a 1 glass pipe shaped like a huge nail. No biggie. Also, find weed under the other college kids in the car. Driver falls on the sword and tells me all of it is his and lets his friends walk free. I like this kid. However, during the search, we find packaged Addies in the cellophane of a cigarette pack with the top melted closed. Ask kid if he's dealing Addies at school. Tell him I'm aware of the prescription pill epidemic. He says no and spins a huge yarn about how he only carries a few on him because he's had his orange pill bottle stolen so many times. Kid seems like a pretty good dude. I decided to take the X-Files approach. Supervisor tells me pursue charges for dealing, blah, blah, blah. I tell the kid he has one chance to prove he's telling the truth. Shows me the broken glass under his driver's seat from a vehicle burglary. Gotta do better. I follow behind him back to his dorm. He lets me in and shows me the busted footlocker he kept them in under his bed. Dunno, kinda weak. Supervisor's telling me to hurry and drop the axe. Tell him to do better. He calls one of the soccer team assistants up and we meet him in the locker room. Shows me the little wooden locker, which has a broken lock. Assistant coach tells me they have replaced the lock on his cabinet 3 times. Campus security has numerous reports of medicine theft from this kid. Nice. I call supervisor up and tell him I have no grounds to pursue delivery charges. Poor bastard just kept getting his Adderalls jacked, and being the big dumb meatball he was, he started packaging them like that. I end up talking to his best friend breaking up a house party a couple months later. Friend tells me kid is a stand-up guy who only uses weed due to extreme anxiety. Totally believable from my interaction with him, and has never sold anything in his life. Friend thanked me and told me his buddy spoke well of me. Friend also tells me he had to drive his buddy to the hospital a few hours after I left from a panic attack due to the whole incident. I felt bad for the kid. So now, whenever I see him smoking up in his car in the mall parking lot, I just wave. Thanks for the gold, I'm honored, but it's not needed. Put it in a savings account. Money is a get, so hold on to it. If you have to part with it, donate it to St. Jude's Children Research Hospital. They do good shit there. Story 23. This will probably get buried, but here's my best story. I had a heroin addict who I arrested for a warrant. While searching her purse, I found a small container with a grayish-brown substance in it, consistent with heroin. When I asked her what it was, she started laughing. She told me to test it because it wasn't heroin. I tested it, and sure enough, the test came back negative. She explained to me that inside the container was the ashes of her dead cat. She said that when she goes to pick up heroin for her friends, she'll take some for herself and cut the rest with her cat's ashes. Her friends have been snorting or shooting up some of her dead cat. Story 24. One of the funnier ones that I remember. We got a call for a kid, he was 18 and a gang member, brandishing a firearm. He had pulled up his shirt pretending to brandish a firearm to intimidate somebody. The person calling only saw a holster. After we got there, he kept telling us it wasn't a gun, but a dildo. We took him down at gunpoint and he was right. He was walking around with a holstered black dildo. Why? Because he could. Haha. Story 25. Was doing a tour as an MP. Not my normal job, but whole other story. And we got called on a domestic. At the house, there's this huge corn-fed guy, about 6'4" and 275, and a petite Asian girl about 4'10" and 95 pounds soaking wet. The whole house was in disarray, and the call had come because of yelling heard by the neighbors. She was crying and talking in an Asian language that none of us understood, and kept gesturing toward her huge husband. He wasn't talking. We wrap him up, take him to the station, and are trying to interview him, but he's not saying much. We intend to charge him with domestic assault. We notice somewhere along the way that he has horrible welts all along the backs of his hands and along his forearms. It took a lot of prying, but we finally got out of him that his wife would beat him with wire coat hangers when she was mad, and apparently that was pretty often. He was too embarrassed to admit to anybody that he was being abused by his wife, who was less than a third of his size. We finally got it straightened out, turned her over to the local police, and barred her from base. Hopefully, the guy got the help he needed. Story 26. I can't speak for the cop, but freshman year of college, I was having a nice evening outside, drinking some soda and smoking a tobacco pipe with my 3 roommates, long-term friends I grew up with, when one went into the dorm. He called me a minute later and said, "Come back to the dorm. Police are here and they are looking for you." I am on my way over and they see me and run up to me, in case I were to run. They asked my name and if I was here all night. I confirmed both my name and that I was at the dorm all evening. Apparently, another freshman guy, my age, build, and height, signed in under my name for an intramural flag football game, got into a tussle with an opposing team member, punched him and broke his jaw. He was last seen fleeing our direction. I'm sure my excuse sounded completely bogus, but it was the truth. Story 27. Not a cop. But this happened to my mom. A long time ago, my mom was driving home from work. She was swerving on the road and was eventually pulled over. The cops that pulled her over assumed she was drunk and decided to just dump her on her doorstop, since the car was only right down the street from where she got picked up. At the time, my brother was only 10, so needless to say, the cops left my mother with a 10-year-old. Her neighbor happened to see the cops drop her off and drive off. The neighbor just so happened to be a nurse at the local hospital. When she saw how my mother was left, she immediately called 911. The same cops came and made the claim that she was drunk and they didn't need to be there. It turned out that my mother was going in shock and was rushed to the hospital. Prior to this, my mother had gone to a chiropractor who had done an acupuncture procedure on her neck that caused damage to her nerves. She actually ended up in a coma for 2 weeks, where when she did come out of the coma, she basically forgot everything. It took 3 years for her to make a, thankfully, full recovery. She still doesn't remember some things from her past, but I'm glad that someone was there for her when this happened. Story 28. Not a cop, and I'm so late to the party here that I doubt many will see, but here goes. I was this person for some 2 lucky cops. So it's the holiday season a few years ago. I work at a coffee shop at the time and go to a coworker's New Year's ugly sweater party or some shit. Have a few drinks until 10 p.m., then switch to water. My one friend gets to talking to me about tea because we work with coffee and tea. Gives me a tea bag and a plastic baggie. I put it in my pocket. 2 a.m. rolls around and I leave, but I am tired as hell. I want to get home and get to sleep, so I'm blasting music to keep me awake and probably going a little too fast, but not drastically. So, anyway, the party lights kick on behind me and I pull over. We go through the questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? You been drinking? Doing anything else? I blow clean on the breathalyzer. I walk the line fine, balance on one leg. Then one of the cops pats me down and reaches my pocket. Him, son, what do you have in your pocket? Me, knowing how ridiculous I'm about to sound. It's tea, officer. Him, about as dubious as you can expect. You expect me to believe you have tea in your pocket. Me, my friend gave it to me. At this point, his partner looks to be trying not to laugh at the absurdity of this situation. The cop in front of me looks over his shoulder at his partner in a, "You believe this guy?" sort of way. Then back to me. Him, get it out. He holds out his hand while I fumble around and withdraw the plastic baggie from my pants pocket, complete with the single serving of tea, neatly labeled, and hand it to the suddenly bewildered officer. Him, why the hell do you have tea in your pocket? He asks me. I like tea, officer. I respond in probably the most matter-of-fact way possible. How partner finally gives up on restraining his laughter. The other cop gives me the tea back and tells me to go home and sleep. I never could bring myself to try that tea. I still have it in the same bag on my shelf. Story 29. Stopped a guy on a suspended registration, and he started getting upset, but not at me. I ask him why he's so upset. He says it's the wife's car. She stopped making payments and it got suspended. On top of that, he was pissed because he was on the way to the new GFs and she was probably going to dump him if he no-showed her. I issued him a criminal ticket, thinking he was going to back off and leave the story. Instead, he goes, I totally get why you gave me a ticket, but I don't want this girl to dump me. She's a smoke. Can you give me a ride there? I say fine, but you have to introduce me, again, thinking he'd back off the story. He says, okay, deal, and away we go. We're sitting outside, and this girl refuses to come out, so he puts me on the phone. I tell her that it's either she comes out and says hi, or I bring him to jail. Out she comes. 11:10. Dude hit the jackpot. He also plead guilty to the ticket, haha. I never told him to do that, but I got a kick out of it. I like to think it was him giving me a wave back. Story 30. Okay, so legit answer. One night I'm out working, and as I go down the street, fairly nice middle-class area surrounded by some high-crime neighborhoods, around midnight I see a dude on a bike, no lights on, pulling a lawnmower behind him on a rope. I immediately flip a 180 and light him up. Recognize the guy's a local homeless dude with some prior burglary theft arrests. I walk up and just open with, "Dude, come on." Guy holds his hands out and swears he didn't steal the lawnmower. Claims someone just gave it to him. I ask who, and he doesn't know a name. So I demand he tell me where to find said lawnmower owner. The directions he gave were literally, go that way a bit, then right at a stop sign, and take one of those side streets that way. It's about halfway down a street at a house that has a pickup and a car in the driveway. By this point, backup had arrived. So I leave him in the presence of backup and drive off in search of his mythical donor of lawn equipment. I made a decent guess as to the first turn, then flipped a mental coin as to which of the next 3 side streets he would have gone down. I picked the second of the 3 streets and start down it. Every other house has a truck and car combo. There must have been a dozen houses that match the description. Halfway down, I see an average-looking house and go, hey, I'll try this one. After all, it's midnight and this is a wild goose chase. Go up, ring the doorbell. Middle-aged dude comes to the door. Hello, sir. Have you been giving away lawnmowers to random sketchy homeless guys at midnight today? Yes. As a matter of fact, he had. Homeowner goes on to complain to me that his wife was upset as his continual inability to get the mower running and had ordered him with some severity to remove the mower from the house or face the consequences. He pushed it to the curb right as homeless guy rode by, and the latter had asked and received his permission to take it. I drove back in shock and amazement, apologized to homeless guy, and sent him on his way. A few months later, we ran into each other at a nearby gas station, and he told me it turned out just to need a new spark plug and that he had gotten it running again before going on to sell it for $150 to someone. For years after, whenever I would run into him, he would always make sure to remind me of the money he made from selling that stolen lawnmower. LOL. Story 31. Had a domestic in progress I responded to during Christmas Day, and the excuse for them fighting was, "We're not mad at each other, we're just upset because we wanted to surprise the kids for Christmas. We got some deer, dressed them up, now they're destroying our house." Turns out there was literally 3 fully grown, white-tailed deer in the house, somehow dressed with full bell harnesses like Santa's reindeer. I had to call the game wardens down, who were then able to help me remove the deer from the property without injury to us or them. How they managed to get the deer and dress them up is still a mystery to this day. Story 32. Not a cop, but I have a very common name and got pulled over for driving across the median, and there was a warrant out for me for rape and assault or something. As it turns out, a guy with the exact same name and birthday, born in the same city as this, and it took me about 20 minutes of pleading to get the officers to realize I did not match the description. I deal with this dude every once in a while. As it turns out, our socials are off by 1 digit. If I ever see him, we are going to have a long talk. Story 33. Long time ago, I was working swing and got off work at 2:30 a.m. It was payday and I'd take my check to the ATM to deposit it. I got pulled over for not having lights on my bicycle. Cop was having a really hard time buying that I was cashing my check at 3:30 a.m. and riding around with a backpack and no lights. He eventually left, but I saw him pull into McDonald's across the street and watch me go to the ATM and put a check in it. He seemed perplexed. Story 34. Not really an excuse, but shocked the shit out of me. I've always been told a diabetic with high blood sugar acts the same as someone who is drunk. Get a call for a car all over the road, hitting trash cans on the side of the road and whatnot. We stop the car and get the driver out. He's slurring his speech like no other. Can't maintain his balance to save his life. Fails all the sobriety tests, but blue zeros on the PBT. He denied drinking and swears up and down he didn't do any drugs. Never mentions the diabetes. We're all scratching our heads, and I remember the blood sugar thing. Call medical to our location, and sure as shit, his blood sugar was 550, and he finally remembers that he hadn't taken insulin in 8 hours. Story 35. Not the cop in this story, but someone crashed into a tree on their way to work, and most people have an excuse as to why they weren't at fault when they crash. In this particular case, the woman said an owl flew into her car, and she swerved off the road into a tree. Anyway, said cop gets into the car to move it for the tow truck. And sure enough, an owl flies from the back seat past the officer's face and out the front window. Surprises the cop. Scared the shit out of him, I imagine. The owl was included in the diagram of the accident report. Story 36. My department frequently had to deal with this male escort who kept getting released in work release programs. No joke we caught this guy giving out hand jobs in broad daylight at stoplights. Anyways, I and a few co-workers leave town for a conference. And guess who we find up to his old tricks? Outside of our jurisdiction, so we don't do anything about it, besides report him. But we talked to him, and he gave some bullshit excuse about how he was flown in on a private jet for some record deal. Yes, he had mentioned his hip-hop career to us earlier. No, I never got his SoundCloud link. Anyways, we sort of forget about him until we get to the Greyhound station, and there he is again up to his normal tricks. He obviously wanted to deflect the conversation from what he was doing, so he offered to give us a ride back to our city in his private jet. We detain him, but before we can even call the local station, a limo rolls up and the chauffeur walks around with a sign with his name on it. Dude was telling the truth about his record deal. We definitely upgraded our travel arrangements after apologizing for not believing him. Little shit still gives us regular trouble, of course. Story 37. Not a cop, but when I was in university, I went to a party and got totally loaded. I decided I shouldn't go to the bar and started walking home. En route, I remember specifically deciding I was too drunk. A cop was going to pick me up, and I should stay at my friends Brent and Scott's place. I walked through the front door, kicked off my shoes, yelled up the stairs that it was just me. I'd done this before, and crashed on the couch. Roughly an hour and a half later, maybe around 1:30 in the morning, I wake up in cuffs. I'm a really heavy sleeper, with alcohol in my system or not, so they were having a real tough time waking me. Finally, I wake, realize I can't move my arms, and see 2 cops and a family of 4. Holy shit, what had happened? The family's just staring at me, and the cops start demanding answers. Naturally, I'm like, ugh, is Brent here? The cops are not impressed. Finally, after about 20 minutes of them shouting at me, I kind of clue in. I asked them the date. It was May 1st. Their lease had literally expired the day before, and the new tenants moved in. I explained and finally asked the cop if I could call them and prove it. They let me, and I had the cop ask him what his address was the day before. Brent recited the same one I had been sleeping in. They still gave me a drunk and public ticket, but no trespassing ticket, and drove me home. Story 38. Me and a friend had the cops called on us for crawling in our friend's window. He was in the bathroom, so he couldn't unlock the door, but the porch window happened to be unlocked, so we found our way in. As I was crawling in, I saw a car parked across the street with someone in it and remarked that it must look like we're breaking in. 5 minutes later, I hear a knock at the door, open it, and, upon seeing a police officer, yelled back into the house, "Hey Jimmy, the cops are here." We explained the situation to the cop while we waited for our friend to get out of the bathroom, but I'm not sure he bought it even after Jimmy came out laughing. He gave Jimmy a serious look and asked, "Do you know these individuals? Like, why would someone be all calm and laughing if two strangers had broken into their house?" Story 39. Obligatory, not a cop. A friend of mine got stopped by a state trooper who spotted a baggie with some crumbly dark brown substance. He insisted it was pot. I don't think he ticketed her, since he knew where she lived, but he seized it for testing because he was sure it was pot. It was cat shit, just like she told him it was. Since she was on her way to the vet, she didn't smoke weed either. She was just a little free-spirited, and he assumed. Story 40. Not a cop, but neither is anyone else here. When I was in university, I lived on campus for a year. One day, a cop showed up at my door talking about me stealing checks. I hadn't stolen any checks and told the officer as much. She let out a big sigh and told me I needed to be honest with her before it got serious. Turns out, another girl attending the same school qualified for the same grant I did and called the organization to request an update, as she hadn't received her check yet. They said the check had been sent out weeks prior. I guess as part of the process to issue a new check, they checked to make sure the original hadn't been cashed. In this case, it had, into my bank account. Turns out the girl has the same first and last name as me, and, for reasons unknown, but the school's address is hers. She didn't live on campus. So when a check I was expecting arrived to my address with my name on it, of course I cashed it. Took the officer a few minutes to work it all out in her head, but in the end I was not hauled off to jail for stealing a check. When my actual check arrived a few days later, I just gave the other girl the cash. Story 41. Not a cop, but I have one from the other perspective. I was home from college for fall break. My friends wanted to smoke, but I didn't, so I literally chilled in my friend's car, parked in some random development while they smoke with some chicks elsewhere. 10 minutes goes by, and 3 cop cars come swarming in from every direction with their lights flashing and blinding spotlight shining directly on my face. Immediately, I thought some old lady thought we were robbing, so I played it cool and collective. They come walking up to the side of the car, and I get out. They ask what am I doing here, and I respond with the most rational thing you could think of on the spot. My bro from college is trying to have sex with a girl, but we have to leave tonight. His facial expression went from curious to, "Are you f***ing serious?" A little while later, my friend comes walking out the woods, just strolling along like he actually had sex. I come walking up to give him my story. The cops yell for him to come over. Cops ask, "So what were you doing back there?" And my bro was like, "I was trying to get it in, but ended up talking about feelings." Story 42. Not a cop, but my dad rolls cigars. He uses this white powder called vegetable gum to seal the wrapper. You mix it with some water and it gets sticky and clear. In powder form, it looks similar to cocaine. My dad had a massive bag on him after a rolling event one night and got pulled over for a traffic violation. They saw the bag of powder laying in a box and asked what it was, and my dad told them. I guess they didn't believe him because they called back up. They had my dad cuffed while they tested it, and sure enough, it came back as not cocaine. They let him go, but it still cracks me up hearing the story. Story 43. Not me, but a close friend is a state trooper. This happened in a super tiny town miles from civilization. And yes, he's a complete moron. He pulled over a lady for speeding. With her in the car was her passing fam husband, who was groaning and sweating in the back seat. When he questioned her, she said they were on the way to the hospital because her husband was in labor. Of course, he called bullshit because the guy looked like as manly man as you could get. He started writing a ticket. The whole time, the husband is screaming in the back seat, and the wife is hollering at Trooper and trying to calm her husband down. And Trooper's mostly ignoring them until he hears the words, "It's coming out!" And the wife started ripping her husband's pants off. And sure enough, there was a head. So yeah, he had to deliver a baby from a trans man on the side of the road while cows mooed at them from the fence. Story 44. I'm a deputy, cop, but we work the county unincorporated areas. Me and a few sector partners, second smallest county in the state, 4th highest population, so we have a lot of deputies in a tiny area. We're hanging out at a gas station at about 3 a.m. to get some coffee and a snack, outside chit-chatting, waiting for the next call to come in. Guy pulls up in a pewter-colored Oldsmobile with a hubcap missing, hops out of the car and starts pumping gas. One of us noticed he had a gun holster on his right side, but couldn't see a gun because his shirt was over it. Us being an open carry state, no big deal. However, the gun was concealed by the shirt, so we just stopped to talk with him. Explained to him that he can't conceal the gun, he said. No problem. It was a mistake from him getting out of the car. Understandable. Other partner looks in the passenger side of the car, and there's a fist-sized saran wrap bag of white powder with multiple $20 bills underneath it sitting on the passenger seat right in plain view. Now to us, a gun, large-sized bag of white powder. Good bit of money underneath, appears to be drug-related. Start asking the guy like, yo, what is this crap and why is it just on your seat? He says, oh, it's powdered wall plaster. I just got it from my grandma. It's 3 a.m. at a gas station. I mean, come on. We're cops, so by all means, we aren't the smartest people on the planet, but we ain't stupid, or so we thought. Turns out, the dude is 100% telling the truth. Gun was legal and legally obtained. His only history we could dig up was speeding tickets and a simple affray charge from years ago. Grandma gave him the plaster so he could fix a hole in his wall, and he didn't have cash to buy it himself, so she spotted him some moolah. Needless to say, he's got a funny story to tell, and I guess now I do too. He was super understanding, and even himself said it was hilarious because it absolutely looked like pure cocaine, and it looked like a huge amount, at least for lowly street deputies. Story 45, throwaway for obvious reasons. Also, not a cop. I live, and this happened in Canada. This is important for building the scene of a long, barren highway, snow on the trees, and a gray, straight stretch of road that only gets that gray when it's so cold the road salt is frozen. I have colitis, the ulcerative kind, the kind that lets you explode bloody feces and mucus while showering, and it washes down the drain like a Sunday morning pee, the kind that is incredibly painful when held in. I was holding it in when my adventure began. I was racing home, well over the speed limit at about 150 km and 100 plus mph, trying not to ruin my car's upholstery. My left leg was pressing so hard on the floor of the car it was trembling. I learned that I can constrict my orifices much better if I use other muscles to cheer them on. I see a terrifying sight ahead. A lonely, prowling police SUV was cruising in front of me. I normally would have slowed down and remained well behind the officer, but this time, I had an unholy demon clawing at my insides, its fingernails ripping painfully through my engorged intestines. I kept up my speed as I was a panicked man close to madness. As expected, the police lights came on, and the siren wailed. This pulled me out of my trance and into a shocked reality. I've never gotten a speeding ticket before, and I froze. The adrenaline shattered the field of pain, and I was able to pull over and address the situation. After sheepishly handing over my papers, the officer asked me, "Why were you driving so fast?" And I replied, "Officer, I'm so sorry, I really have to go to the bathroom. I have colitis." The officer didn't look impressed and made an offer. "Is that so? If you can go right now in the ditch, I'll let you go." I literally leapt at the offer. I scrambled out of the car and exposed my butt to the freezing cold air, and nothing. I gave a little push. Nothing. I didn't understand, but apparently adrenaline and freezing cold can hinder things. Then it happened immediately. Following a cough caused by the cold air, my butt was unleashing steaming foul spray of blood and feces that would make a zombie flee. It was a horizontal fountain of stench and terror. I wiped myself with some snow and cleaned up my inner thighs. I looked up to see a genuinely concerned man with a pale look of shock. The officer had removed his hat and, while clutching it to his chest, handed me my papers and let me go. TLDR, cop pulled me over. Didn't believe I had to poo. When I did, he let me go edit. Added obligatory, not a cop. Story 46. I'm not a cop. This is my friend's story. I pulled someone over and his eyes were swollen like pink eye, so I thought he has a drug substance in his system. But he said he was just crying because his cat died. Not believing him, I had him take a field sobriety test, and he passed everything. After this, he asked me to go to his house and mourn with him. I waited until I was done, and he took me to his house, and I see a giant tent in the backyard. And when we walk into the backyard, I see a gravestone and it read in loving memory of Floofy. I was sad. Story 47. Guy flew by me in the emergency charged breakdown lane while we're in stopped traffic due to a crash a few miles north. So naturally, I pull into the emergency lane, put my lights on, and get him to stop. Walk up to the car and go, "Dude, what the hell? Are you serious?" And I see he's sweating, like sweating. On the verge of tears, I should probably call for EMS sweating. He tells me he had gone to lunch at a buddy's and went back to Buddy's house and fell asleep. When he woke up, he knew something was wrong and didn't want to blow up his friend's bathroom. Fair. Still asked for his license, registration, whole 9 yards. Because if this guy's gonna be a moron, I might as well do something, but didn't give him a ticket since I figured the high possibility of him himself on his way home would be worse. Better than a $163 ticket and 3 points on his license. Told him to wait in the travel lanes like everyone else, and that his car better be at the gas station that's at the exit 1-2 mile down the road. It was so I assume he didn't ruin his car. Story 48. My partner and I arrested a fellow one evening on a warrant. During the search, we found one of those metal pill bottles that go on a person's keychain. You can buy them at Walgreens and the like. Those are sometimes used in an illegal manner. The guy is a known drug user, and inside the container is a crushed white powder. One would assume he is concealing drugs. We take him and the container to the station for testing. We start with cocaine, nope, meth, MDMA, X, opiates, all no. Keep in mind that testing requires a small sample every time. Finally, I just ask him, what is in the metal container on your keys? He pauses, then starts losing his mind. Those are my deceased father's ashes I keep with me. Every ounce better be there. I slink out of the room and run over to the other officer. Stop. He was not very happy, needless to say. Edit. Got a few comments about the metal pill container. To clarify, they are legal to buy and have. I often see them used to hold prescriptions, which isn't allowed in many states. Story 49. Not a cop, but I was the one with excuse. I had just started uni at the time. My friend and I were hanging out and decided to go back to my place. We walk in the front door to see my dad sitting on the couch, head in hands, just looking overwhelmed. Behind him, my 2 sisters are screaming and running back and forth with a plastic bin, and upon realizing I'm there, start yelling for me to grab the cats, because they're trying to eat a bat. Long story short, my friend and I join them in screaming while trying to catch this bat and keep the cats away from it. We finally catch the bat and everything is silent for a few moments until there's a bang on the door. Dad answers it and calls us girls over to explain that there was indeed a bat and no one was being murdered like the neighbors thought. The officers looked so done with life after we talked to them. Story 50. Not a cop. My then GF was driving me home after I had a very big night out. I had spilt whiskey on myself, so I stunk of booze. We get pulled over and he breathalyzed her, and it comes back positive for drinking. She burst into tears and said she was sober driver, and there must be something wrong. The cop quickly apologizes and asks her to do another breath test out of the car, away from me and my booze-soaked mess. She collects herself and passes the test. The cop walks to the car and says, I owe my GF McDonald's. I was all too keen to stuff my face with food. Story 51. Australian here, we have this thing where police close off roads to do breath tests and drug testing. Super normal and stuff. Anyways, I was on my way back from work and was doing a detour to a sister pharmacy. I was transferring some stock. I get pulled over, so random breath test, pass with flying colors naturally. And then came the big question. Do you have any drugs in here? I had never been asked that before, but it is a pretty dodgy area I'm in. I look at the pile of stock next to my seat and looked back at the officer and awkwardly said, maybe? I have to drive forward and off to the side. 2 more officers come over once I'm parked and ask, what drugs do you have in your possession? I felt really dumb and embarrassed here. I told them in a frantic voice, I'm on my way back from work. I work in pharmacy. I'm transferring some stock to this other pharmacy, and I don't really know what I have in that box in the seat. The officers kept a straight face, but I can kind of tell that they were thinking that I was full of it. They open the box of stock, and the first they see is a large packet of incontinent pads, and then toothbrushes and some painkillers, and then, oh shit, benzos. They sell on the street for good amount, and of course, they were right at the bottom, as if I was trying to hide it. Also, there were some cancer medications and whatnot. I showed them the invoice, and they had to call my pharmacy first. Big surprise, they were close. They called my boss, who casually greeted me with screaming kids in the background, on the phone, and tried to reassure the officers who were talking to him that it was a legit transfer. Lastly, they called the pharmacy I was on my way to. The pharmacist in charge was new, and also had a strong accent. Eventually, I don't know what happened, but they got the right amount of verbal confirmation as well as the invoice, and decided to dismiss me. As stressful as it all was, I sit back in the car ready to go, when one of the officers comes to my window with a big-ass grin and tell me, remember to take good care of them pads. All but the incontinence pads were packed away and I smiled and put the seatbelt over it. The man laughed and I drove off to the pharmacy. Story 52. Not a cop, but tangentially related. One summer night in high school, I was playing cat and mouse with a friend, basically drive around town and try to lose one another. I was doing about twice the speed limit on a road on the edge of town when I decided to kill the engine, to cut my lights, and turn into a small unused road to hide. Lo and behold, there was a cop sitting there, waiting for an idiot just like me to go flying past. So he came over wondering why I had just rolled in, and I said, I don't know, my car just died. I bet it's just vapor lock. Watch this. And he proceeded to open my gas cap, which led of a huge hiss. A normal symptom of vapor lock, I guess. Try it now. And of course, I fired up my car and said thanks, and drove off into the night. Story 53. Posting for the cop that pulled me over because I don't think he uses Reddit. My girlfriend and I are in my car, stopped at a light with the windows up, when I noticed classical music. Immediately, I roll down the windows to see who's blasting that shit loud enough for me to hear in my closed car, and it comes in just as it swells, and we determine that it's coming from the neighborhood next to us. Naturally, I turn in to see who's throwing this absolute rager. I signal, but, I otherwise, without warning, just yeet into this place. And the officer behind me, whom I'm just now noticing, follows me in. Oh, he wants us, I say, as I noticed the no outlet sign near the entrance. The music had faded by this point, because, of course, dumbass. It was a car in front of you playing the music. No one would be partying to that. So I pull into a cul-de-sac and try to turn around, but the cop is parked at the head of the street. He lights me up and pulls up to me, and after I'd and reg, basically asks me what I'm doing, because he ran my play and knows I don't live here. Well, officer, I heard loud classical music and I wanted to see where the awesome party was. He's dumbfounded. He says to me, okay, look, I don't not believe, but this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, so I'm going to pull over there. Don't go anywhere. And get out, and you're going to tell me that story again. I do. He's laughing by this point. After a pause, he says, I just want you to know that this is the most absurd story I've ever heard. And it's completely true? Yes, sir. All right, now have a good day. Story 54. Posted this before. Hopefully I can explain it better this time. We had a woman calling almost nightly that her neighbors were terrorizing her. She claimed they were prank calling her, setting off their car alarms in the middle of the night, leaving things on her doorstep, etc. Every time we responded, we found no evidence of anything. One time, an officer parked a block away and heard nothing, while she called 911 and said the neighbors were setting off car alarms. I looked into her history and found out she had lived in 3 different cities and filed harassment complaints against her neighbors in all 3 cities. Clearly nuts, right? One time, she downloaded an app that unblocks phone numbers. I responded and called the number. It was her neighbor. After enough pressure, we found out that these 2 70-year-old lesbians would get high in the middle of the night and torment their neighbor. I turned it over to our detectives, who had a warrant authorized. I never found out why they were doing it. Story 55. Former U.S. Coast Guard, and actually did law enforcement. For those unfamiliar, the Carolinas and the States, and especially Wrightsville Beach, Myrtle Beach, New Topsail, Lockwood's Folly along the NCSC border are overflowing with drunk and or stupid boaters during the summers, especially with UNCW nearby. Drunk college kids on the water everywhere doing reckless shit. BOIs, illegal charters, around outside of the channel, cutting bows, speeding, ignoring no wake zones, and even the odd drug trafficking, illegal firearms trafficking charges. Suffice it to say, combined with hurricane season, we were quite busy from May Sept. One Friday afternoon, our UD gets a call out on Channel 16, like 911 for boaters, from a captain calling in a pontoon boat that has flipped into 20 young, intoxicated males in the water. We arrive on scene with another 47s from a nearby station and are fishing these drunk idiots from the water. They packed 24 people on board a 14-person pontoon boat, and of course it flipped. As we're pulling them out, literally all of them were drunkenly threatening us with their daddy's law firm. It was like a shitty 90s teen MTV rom-com come to life. We just rolled our eyes, zip-tied them, didn't pack enough cuffs, and 90% of them were combative drunk, even seeing the pistols on our hips, rifles, shotgun slings. Turns out it was an entire frat of future lawyers, studying at Elon, whose fathers were all lawyers as well. Still didn't save them from the local U.S. attorney and reckless operation of a boat, BUE, unlicensed captain, etc. charges. Still was surreal with dozens of drunk 20-year-old dudes wailing and telling us their daddy would sue us. Don't even get me started on jet skier stories. Story 56. Not an officer. I was pulled over the other day for the first time in a couple of decades. Officer, where are you in a hurry to be? Me, actually, I'm on my way to jury duty. Officer, disappeared for a while to research my squeaky clean record. Do you have a copy of the summons? Me, yes sir, I just pulled it out to get the address in my GPS. Officer, well, I've never pulled anyone over who had a real jury summons, so I'm going to let you go, but slow it down. What are they going to do if you're late? Me, thank you so much, officer. I appreciate it. And while I was not intentionally speeding, the summons does say that I could get a bench warrant for failing to appear or being late, but I absolutely will watch my speed. Story 57. There's a great Forensic Files episode that fits this question. A guy picks up a hitchhiker, gets into an altercation with him, and manages to drive off again without him. The driver is shaken by the incident and decides to drive around a bit before going home, which is only a mile up the road. By the time he has cooled down enough to go home, the same hitchhiker, who had no idea beforehand where the driver lived, has managed to rape and slain the driver's mother. The driver calls the cops and explains how the hitchhiker he'd gotten into a fight with earlier walled a mile to his home and murdered his mother as revenge for not driving him all the way. Cops, of course, don't buy this for a plethora of reasons. How did the hitchhiker know where the driver lived, and how did he make it there on foot? Cops even doubted the existence of the hitchhiker and called bullshit on the entire story, although driver was never charged with anything for lack of evidence. Well, 10 years later, turns out the driver's story was true. Also turns out that after he kicked the hitchhiker out of his vehicle, the hitchhiker walked a mile up the road where he planned to rob a random house. He picked the only house that had their lights off. Unbeknownst to him, the driver who had just kicked him out of his vehicle minutes earlier lived there with his mother. Just a random crime and a bizarre set of coincidences too far-fetched to be believable. But as they say, truth is stranger than fiction. Story 58. I was one with an excuse. I was 16 years, been 10 years it happened. I was experiencing drugs for the first times, and this time was ecstasy. I was with my friend and we were walking outside tripping our balls. We like at least 10 kilometers far from out town. So we began to walk on the small highway. We started walking and laughing our ass off when we saw a cop turning on his lights and pulled over. I immediately hid my little baggies of ecstasy, there was like $4, in my underwear. So the cops asked, "What are we doing in the middle of the highway at 1 a.m.? My friend was so freaked he could barely talk. So I said, "We are lost to Fisher. I just know my house is towards that way." He looks at me like WTF and says he'll give us a ride home. At first we said no, we're okay, but they began to be suspicious, so we just went into the car. It was like a 10-minute ride, but it felt like hours. I remember my friend staring at his hands like out of the planet. Arrived at my house, the cops asked if my parents are awake. I said no. My parents would have actually flipped the out seeing me high like that. And then he said, "Go on." He didn't even search our pockets or tell my family. We went immediately in the backyard, which I said, "This is where I enter my house." He stayed a couple of minutes in his car and then left. Obviously, the cops know we were high. I think they just wanted us to be safe. Since that day, I've never touched that stuff ever again. It was such a shitty trip. Story 59. Not a cop. But here's a funny story where a cop heard a BS excuse that was true. And I'm fuzzy on the story, but here's what I remember. Once, a guy was driving with his infant, and I forgot the reason, but a cop pulled him over. They searched his car and found a box of First Foods rice cereal, which any parent of Reddit knows looks like cocaine. The cop thought it was actually cocaine, stashed in a clever spot. So the guy was charged with possession. They didn't even bother checking. He then had them test the rice cereal, which came back negative for cocaine and any other drug it could have been mistaken for, and took that to court. If I'm correct, he's suing that police department or filing a suit against them for false charges. Story 60. Not a cop, but have a story. My friend's dad basically had to have all of his teeth extracted and replaced with veneers because they all hurt, and he couldn't chew. I don't think this is common, but for whatever reason, he had to wait before getting them out. During this time, he crushed up Trebor extra strong mints and used a spoon to eat them. He crushed up a few packets, sealed the bag, and was driving with them without really considering what it looked like. From what he told my parents, it was almost the entirety of a 4-pack of mints, and all of them in one plastic bag. Police pulled him over and immediately arrested him because they were sure it was cocaine from the consistency. He was proper adamant, like, "Just open the bag and smell them," and they were laughing at him like, "You think we'd be that stupid?" But even when they did eventually open it, they were so sure he'd just put some mints in to throw them off. I don't know how long they held him for, but he missed work, and my friend had to come over for dinner, as both her parents were sorting it out. TL. Dar. Not the moral of the story, but hiding mints in your drugs won't throw the police off their hunt. Story 61. Not a cop. I am an attorney. I had a client who agreed to cooperate in a criminal matter. He was charged in a drive-by shooting. As part of the cooperation, he had to divulge where his gun came from. He told the prosecutor that he found it in a tree. The prosecutor got angry at the response. He began to lambast my client when the detective said, "Wait, I had a case where the shooter claimed to have hidden his gun in a tree, but it wasn't there when we went to get it." He asked my client where the tree was located. Same tree. I was as surprised as the prosecutor that he had told the truth. Story 62. Had a call one night for some teenagers trespassing on one of the large properties in the more wealthy part of my patrol area. Get there, partner and I found the kids and asked them what they're doing. They said they heard a school rumor there was a camel kept on the property. This is in the southwestern US, ain't no camels here. We tell them to get out of there and they didn't argue. My partner looks at me and goes, I kind of want to see if there is a camel. So we're wandering around the property with our flashlights when all of a sudden I turn and my flashlight reveals an actual live untethered camel just hanging out and chilling. We talked with the property owner who wanted to press charges on the kids for trespassing, but my partner was able to talk him out of it when we started asking if he had the required permits for the camel and if the city knew about it, because if he wanted a report, they would. It was an interesting night. Story 63. A number of years ago, I was at my friend's apartment until 3 a.m. playing D&D. I was driving home on the highway and doing 130 kilometers h with a 100 kilometers h limit. I get pulled over. Cop asks for my license, asks why I was speeding. I'm tired, it's 3 a.m. I don't even try to lie or make excuses. I just say something like, I'm sorry, it's 3 a.m. and I was at a friend's playing D&D and wanted to get home to sleep. No excuses. Cop asks me, what is D&D? I say, Dungeons and Dragons. Cop says, oh, and there's an awkward pause. She looks at my license after the delay. Cop says, looks like you've lost some weight. I'm confused because I hadn't. In fact, I had put on 5 to 10 pounds since my license photo was last taken. I say as much. Another, oh, and awkward silence. She gives me my license back and let me go without a ticket. I think I accidentally made her feel awkward about the D&D and my weight, so she let me off. It was weird. Story 64. Late to the game. This is gonna get buried. This isn't as interesting as the rest, etc. I once stopped a guy at night on a dark country road for throwing a lit cigarette butt out the window of his car. I distinctly saw the distinctive spray of sparks from the area of the passenger side rear wheel. When I went up to contact the driver, he was polite, but told me he didn't throw any cigarette butts out the window. I reminded him I have a dashboard camera and asked if he wished to revise his story. The driver was adamant, saying he doesn't smoke and that I could search his car if I wanted. I leaned in and noted no smell of tobacco. I went back to my car and reviewed the video. Near as I could tell, the car drove over a lit butt on the roadway and threw a shower of sparks. I cut him loose and told him to drive safely. Story 65. Not a cop, but at least I was a police dispatcher, so the cops were directly involved. Man calls 911, claims that a man dressed up as a woman was waiting for him in his home and attempted to rape him. Caller had run to safety before calling. He claimed he had no idea who this was or why this would happen. Under further questioning, he changed his story to say it was his landlord who was dressing up in drag and trying to rape him because he wanted to charge a higher rent. This set off everybody's BS detector, but it turned out the cross-dressed landlord was still home. Responding officer was not amused. Story 66. Stopped a speeder in a residential neighborhood. Female driver said she was in labor and was driving home to get her insurance card. She was a few blocks from the hospital, but traveling in the opposite direction. I called her out on that, and she said the hospital needed the card and would not see her otherwise. My son was born a few months prior, so this story reeked of BS. I told her if she mailed me a copy of a birth certificate showing a birth within 24 hours of the ticket, I would talk to the DA about dismissing the ticket. Sure as shit. 3 weeks later, I get a letter in the mail with a copy of a birth certificate, with the driver listed as the mother. Time of birth was 9 hours after the citation. DA dismissed the ticket. Story 67. When I was 18, I got pulled over around 2 a.m. The cop thought I had been drinking as I was swerving a little. Small country road, no traffic. Asked me all the usual questions, and I could tell he didn't believe me when I said I hadn't drank anything and was, in fact, just dancing to the music to keep myself awake. He did the pen light test. Follow the light with your eyes without moving your head. My eyes were dry from being tired and having the heat on, so I failed. Luckily, my house was in view from where I was pulled over. Another thing he didn't believe me about when he asked where I lived, and I pointed at the only house in sight. So he followed me to my driveway and actually waited for me to unlock the door and go inside before he pulled away. Long story short, was car dancing. Got pulled over thinking I was drunk. Didn't believe my house was where I said until I went inside. Story 68. I made a routine traffic stop for speeding. The man in the front seat was visibly nervous when I approached the car. When I got close, he threw his hands out of the window and claimed he was a woman and was having a miscarriage. After EMTs got there, it turns out a trans man who was having a miscarriage and had no one to bring them to the hospital and decided to drive themselves. Story 69. I got pulled over for speeding on my way to play that I was starring in. Cop asked me why I was in such a hurry. I said I had to get on stage. Luckily, I was already in costume. It was the Crucible, and I was Abigail wearing my bonnet and all. He came to one of the performances later that week too. Story 70. Not a cop. But when I arrived home a few weeks earlier, I saw this guy being beaten like crazy. I'm Ethiopian and thieves are beaten hard in Africa because a guard and my neighbor, car owner, caught him trying to steal something from under a car. This guy was claiming that a street dog chased him to protect her pups, and he ran under the car to hide from the dog and was not stealing anything, even though he had a screwdriver and everything. We all laughed at his stupid seeming excuse, but you guessed it, dude was like an electrician coming home from work, hence the utilities. And he was actually decent and had wife and kids. So long story short, dude sued, and my neighbor's in prison. Story 71, my wife's story. She got pulled over for something stupid. I think it was busted license plate light. Handed over half-burned driver license. Cop was like, WTF? She explained her iPhone exploded and burned her license and a lot of other cards. Cop didn't believe it. It was true though. Our headboard still has a scorch mark on it. Story 72. In 2009, I stopped a guy for speeding and give the whole introduction. I asked him if he had a legal reason to speed. He said, I think my kid has H1N1. My first thought was, sir, buddy. I looked in the back seat and saw the kid looked horrible. I didn't even question it. I told him to get the hell to the hospital. We were only a few miles away from one. Story 73. Not a cop. I'm a dispatcher. We got a call about a pretty serious sounding domestic from a neighbor. Lots of screaming and crying and things being thrown around. Caller thought it sounded physical. As officers are en route, the original caller calls back and says, everything is fine. It's a dispute over a TV show. Officers get on scene and turns out the screaming and yelling was over the American Idol finale. Imagine being mad enough about a singing show that you start throwing shit around your house and get the cops called on you. Your neighbors think you're beating your wife. Story 74. My meal was speeding because her dog was sick after eating a dozen rancid deviled eggs. Got pulled over and the cop was mid-sentence when the poor thing projectile vomited green. Awful smelling puke all over the inside of the car. Officer gave them an escort and carried the big girl in for her. No ticket and the dog was okay. Story 75. I was arrested for suspicious activity one time. Well, not arrested, but detained. They found a bag of white powder that I was taking to my friend's house to bake with. It was baking soda. So even when we said it was baking soda, they just thought we were cooking drugs. They kept asking for the needles and everything. I just wanted a cake. IDK if they will ever believe us. But they ripped the car apart. Story 76. Heads up, sad story. Sent to an unresponsive 2-month-old. Work on him unsuccessfully. Dad is obviously inconsolable and all he can say is, he woke up and his kid wasn't breathing. Lips are blue, bruising around mouth, nose, and bloodshot eyes. Clear signs of smothering, so we suspect it's intentional. Eventually we find out kid was sleeping on dad's chest, rolled into dad's armpit and suffocated there. Horrible tragedy, but accidental. As much as parents want to connect with their kids, don't sleep with them. I've worked too many accidents like this. Story 77. A car I was traveling behind was unable to maintain its lane and had erratic speeds. All signs of an impaired driver. I stopped him and he said he had a frog in his car and he didn't want it to jump on him. I looked and there was a frog on his dashboard. I got the frog out safely and let him go with a warning because it was just too funny.